You replace the whoever is democratically elected and you put in a dictator. You get paramilitary organizations, you have a military coup, and then you change the story. So everybody who is against you is reimagined as being like these horribly wicked people, and then everyone who is in support of the coup becomes the heroes of the country. And I do think that a lot of people from Latin countries really, really respond to my work, and I think that maybe part of it has to do with that because of these kind of shared history that that the presence of the military and this kind of
there would be no Nicaragua or El Salvador civil wars or all of those. Like, it's just constant.
North and South Korea.
You all know my name, but my name is Sung-Hee Son. I am an artist and curator. Welcome to the closing reception of Dreams and Migrations here at BG Gallery. This is our third annual AAPI exhibition, and this time with a special moderated panel talk hosted by Javier Proenza, who is right behind me. His podcast is called What's My Thesis? I first heard about AAPI Heritage Month just a few years ago. First thing I thought was, awesome, where are all the art events for it? And very surprisingly, I couldn't find a single one anywhere in the country, which is really surprising. I mean, of course, there are many events that focus on food and music and, you know, all sorts of other cultural things, but I couldn't find one specifically focusing on fine arts. Fortunately, here at BG Gallery, we had an opening in the calendar, and so I jumped on it, and it was only for 1 week, but I reached out to a handful of artists and community leaders that I trust, including Jen Chang, who's sitting here in front of us. And I told them about the concept, and I said, we only have 1 week to do it. It's only going to be for one night, but let's go. And it was really amazing because each one of those people got on the phone, got on their emails, and reached out to their contacts. And literally within 5 days, we put together an exhibition with cultural programming for one night. And it was a really, really special and wonderful experience, especially for everyone that participated, because again, like the common response was, yeah, how come there isn't? Yeah, you're right. I don't see any art-specific AAPI events. So everyone's really happy to be part of it. And then we've been able to continue that tradition on with this year being the third annual presentation of it. Just background about AAPI. So Jimmy Carter put it into effect. It started out as a 1 week celebration, an annual 1 week. And by the mid-90s, it was turned into a month-long celebration. Sad news that I just discovered this morning when I was double-checking these facts was that our current president in January canceled AAPI Heritage Month, which is just, tragic.
Thank you guys for having me. This is really exciting. I grew up in some pretty interesting conditions. My parents were diplomats. They worked for the UN, and I have always had a real interest in cultural issues. I am from Miami, really. That's kind of how I identify. I moved to the US when I was 12 years old. So I'm always really interested in cultural stuff. But the reason I bring up my background is I'm always interested in people's origin stories when they get into art, because art is a very specific thing to want to get into, and I don't think it's necessarily a choice people have, or it's like maybe a little bit of a burden too, and I'm always interested because I mean it almost makes sense. I grew up in Italy. There was art everywhere, all the architecture was crazy. So I kind of want to get your guys' background. Who wants to start? Dave, you're the resident Angelino. So, because you've spent the most time in LA, you were born and raised, right?
I was born and raised, yeah, downtown.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background growing up, and then we can maybe start getting into how you got into art? And I'm always interested in that moment where, as a kid, you remember fondly on and being like, oh, it makes sense that I became an artist, and then the stuff where later on you're like, oh no, I have to do this. It's not a choice.
Yes, I think it's important to say when I was a kid, I had attention deficit and like hyperactivity disorder, or I was diagnosed with having ADHD, and so I think culturally, or maybe it was like taboo to put like kids on drugs. So my mom, I think I'm grateful for her now, but she put me in every activity possible, and I sucked at everything. I remember crying in piano class. I was born in December, so I was always younger than all my classmates. So I was physically like more clumsy and awkward, so sports wasn't my thing. And then she put me in drawing class and art class, and it was like a match made in heaven at that point. Like, it's something I enjoyed and something that I was good at. So, and it helped. As a parent now, I know like it helped her out. Like, she was like, this is something that's gonna keep him occupied, and something he enjoys doing. So, I kind of, like you said, I had no choice. I kind of, that's the thing I needed to do. And then, so growing up, my mom just put me in art class, and I wanted to be in art class, like different art classes everywhere we went every year. And so, as you know, you have a talent, but you have to always nurture that. So naturally, that talent was nurtured through these classes. I think, adolescence in different periods of your life, you kind of don't do it as much. So I was doing LA culture growing up in the 90s. Got caught up in like graffiti and gangs. It's more about identity at that point and trying to figure out your own life. So you kind of not doing art, you're trying to figure out your social situation more. And then into college, I didn't even apply as an art major. I applied as an animal science major because I was very influenced by like Animal House. So I was really interested in going to college for the experience. I got kicked out. I joined a fraternity. Got kicked out of school. Had to reapply as an art major so I could actually get a degree, like something I can do easily, essentially. Then 10 years later, I went to grad school, and that's when I actually decided I would make art like a career and take it seriously. So into
how old
my
were you
30s,
at that point?
yeah, I was like 30, probably 30, wow. Early 30s. So yeah, very, very late in life.
Mm-hmm. I mean, not that late.
I mean, in terms of, no. Well, I'm in my mid 40s now, but very late in life or in terms of the taking it seriously. So no offense to anybody. But in terms of getting my act together, very later in life. Specifically because we're talking about art and it's been a part of my life for so long. Yeah, that's the context. So I don't know. That's sort of my story. Yeah, it took a while. I mean, right now I struggle with that. I have a family. I have kids.
You struggle with what?
With the idea of art being a career and it being sort of a burden more than a joy to do it sometimes. I mean, a lot of times it's just commissions I'm trying to finish or projects I need to get done and I need to get paid.
What's good to hear someone that works and gets paid as an artist also struggling with it, because I mean I think that is something that a lot of people struggle with, right? The idea of being able to actually have an income, which is why I kind of feel like which is why it fits into that burden category for me, where it's like people will have day jobs and have entirely separate lives, and that's like a labor that they don't even, I mean, they value it, but it's not valued widely. So for someone like you who gets commissions and whatnot, that reinforces the idea that that's a universal sense for artists, right? Like that it doesn't necessarily stop when you have at least monetary success, right?
Yeah. I think that's just the reality of it, right? That once the thing you enjoy doing that you didn't get paid for when you were younger, now there's a transaction connected to it, and then that joy naturally leaves, right? The situation, it's becomes a necessity. So but I am not complaining about my current.
Oh no,
situation.
I wasn't shaming you. I was just. I'm impressed by you, but to hear you say that is like, oh, okay. I'm not that far behind.
I know the struggle though.
Yeah. No. I mean, I bet you do. I mean, I'm sure that you have. Once you start dealing with money, there's probably people that don't want to pay you, and then you have to deal with that, right? That adds a whole new dimension.
It's a business finance. So all the things that come with a business, you're dealing with. Yeah. And then could you describe a little bit about your work and kind of where you're at right now? We will get more into your actual practice a little bit, but I kind of wanted to focus on the content of what's in the show to highlight it a bit. Oh, the work that's actually in the show?
Yeah.
They're sort of different. There's two from a series I did for a solo show I did. I think what I do is I take images from archival photographs and I recreate that as a way of talking about specific history. And then I juxtapose it against signage I'll see in Koreatown. So, I mean, very, very just simply put, it's just about that story of immigration and kind of finding a new life here. And then, it's up to the audience to put together a story. Is it these people who came over and grew up and started a new life? Something I relate to very, very much. Sort of the crux of a lot of the work I do. And just a lot of, I was born in this country, so I don't have a lot of formal knowledge except for what I gleaned about my Korean culture. So I do a lot of research, stuff that's very familiar, but like language too, it's very familiar, but I don't actually know the symbols and the meanings. So one of the paintings here just draws from symbols from the Korean culture and ideas I put together based on that. It's my take as a Korean American on Korean culture, essentially. Yeah. So very specific POV.
Yeah, I mean, you can feel the LA-ness for sure in it. I mean, just especially looking at them in person, as someone who's from Miami and has not experienced a city with a Koreatown of the scale that LA has. When I remember the first time I was driving down Koreatown, I was like, wait, these characters, they're different than the ones that I'm used to growing up around, So it's really interesting. And I think it's cool because that's a side of LA that's big, but it's not necessarily represented. It reminds me a lot of the stuff that is getting into spaces now in Latino culture, where it's the way that I describe it is there's been this culture outside of the white cube for so long. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, maybe we should put some of that in here, and I think that's the element that I think, especially those two pieces over there, really speak to that LA-ness, right? And that your perspective is Korean, but it is from the diaspora that comes here, right?
It is, yeah. I do, when I talk about my work, it's very much from LA as well. It's very LA influenced.
No, yeah, it definitely reads like that. And then Mei, same question. No, I'm kidding. I
can repeat the question, or what was the question?
I'll refresh you. So basically, that the idea, the main points is where's your history, where you come from, and then the first early ideas of what art you like to make. I guess a good example that I always use on the show is one time someone told me that they used to pause Pokemon battles and then draw the action sequences.
Yes.
And then, that's the kind of memory that I'm looking for early on. And then the moment that you kind of realize oh no, I can't escape this. I thought it was just for fun.
Well, that's a really good question. I have a roundabout way of answering it because my parents came to this country initially because they were just tired of this kind of a systematic violent discrimination in Indonesia that we suffered. And I think we were always protected by Malay friends, we're Peranakan Chinese, which is kind of a hybrid group of Chinese and Malay. And we've always survived on Malay friends, perhaps if they're burning Chinese houses, a Malay friend will say, please don't burn their house, they're nice people, they're my friends, please don't burn their house. And so our house didn't get burned. But I think they were tired of that happening constantly. So in various forms. And so we came here, and this was after the genocide, which killed, I think there's speculation whether it was 500,000 or 2 million people at the time. And then when they came to this country, they decided that they came from a country which had such strict moral requirements that everybody had to follow. And then there was this country where people could somehow make choices. They could make individual choices in their life. My mother, maybe, she could have made a choice of having a career and not being a mother. It was like there was all these choices, and they really couldn't figure out what to do with it. And so they sent all the kids away, basically. So my older sister and I, we were sent back to live in this very small town in Java with our grandparents. And I think it was that process that made me resort to art in order to make sense of the world. And maybe I wouldn't say it was based on trauma so much as just trying to figure things out. And I think there's a kind of artist who does that. Not every artist does that, but I think it's like you almost draw things or create things or write things repetitively over and over and again to try to somehow, it has this kind of odd spiritual quality to it, which it has to do with some way of figuring out why things are the way they are. And so that's the kind of work that I made, which was kind of really repetitive, like drawing the same object over and over and over again. And then if my grandparents wanted me to play outside, I would have a hard time going outside to play because I would just be consumed with making this kind of sacred object that I was trying to make.
Sacred object. Okay. Is there something, am I reading into that, or is it just the ritualness of that?
I think there is the element of
what objects were you drawn to drawing? Because if you're drawing it over and over again, is it like a figurine?
It was a female figure constantly.
Okay.
And I think it was this idea of maybe a mother or a saint or something, because we grew up very post-colonial, I think, as most people at that time in Indonesia. So
can you expand on that? Sorry to interrupt your flow, but what do you mean by post-colonial?
Well, because Indonesia was occupied by first the Dutch East India Company and then the Dutch government for 400 years. I mean, for a very long time. And so our systems had been based on that. And I do feel that there is a difference between the way people, their point of view and the way they look at the world, between people who come from or grew up in a place that had been colonized versus a place that had not been colonized. I mean, it is a very different outlook in the world, and it is a different perspective. So as part of that, there was this church that was a Catholic church, and we had been converted from Buddhism to Catholicism by the Portuguese. And I was woken up at 6 a.m. every day, woken up earlier, and then we would be at the church at 6 a.m. So because it was equatorial, it would be walking in the dark till we got to the church. And then it was the only Western building in town. And then as you sat at the church, you would see this light start to transform and come from the stained glass windows. And that kind of held this kind of magic to me. Like, this is like, it's a sense of this kind of Westernism that was so pervasive and had been so foundational in our lives.
Yeah, that's the stuff that I grew up romanticizing. So yeah. It's interesting how
right, like in Rome, for instance.
Yeah, but yeah. Did the Catholicism take? Because I'm a lapsed Catholic.
I'm a lapsed Catholic as well.
Okay.
So, because and I don't do it even. I don't think I do it purposely, but I do think
Did you inherit the guilt that they try to? The Catholic guilt?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. So then you're Catholic. No, there's no running away. No, that's interesting. What were the first kind of images that you were, so like you mentioned the stained glass, was that a reference for you as well? Like the
Yes.
the Catholicism? what other kind of public art was there that was accessible and stuff like that? You know,
Like
because
there-
for example,
Yeah.
Dave is taking inspiration from the city, right?
Yeah.
Which, like, is it more in Dave's way of interpreting that, or for inspiration, right? Because LA is beautiful, as opposed to like, or was there an actual like artistic style that was pervasive, that or was Catholicism the only place? Like, did you walk into churches and churches were like colorful places full of art, and then the rest of it wasn't, or was I don't know.
No, there were other things. Indonesia is Javanese culture is very has a lot of a very strong history of artisanship, and one of the most important things in Javanese culture is batik or batik. And my family is a batik family. You know, that was what we did, and so I would be surrounded by it all the time in my grandparents' shop. And so that affected me because it had a lot of similarities to like the saints. And I do use, as you can see, I use like these clear substrates, which lets light through. And if there's directed light, you could see the image on the backside. So it reflects and refracts like stained glass. So that was, and I do tend to use these very ephemeral type of materials in my work, but what was I'm sorry, I think I lost my thread of thought, but
I was following you though.
You were, but yeah. But batik also has these symbols. Like if you were someone who was powerful, you would wear a batik that had garudas or eagles on it that would show everybody how powerful you were. If you were just married, you would wear one that had stars, which means love, like a romantic love, and that would denote that how important that was to you. So it's like wearing tattoos. I feel like it's like having tattoos.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But a garment. Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by different cultures and how they use patterns. So I'm gonna definitely hit you up for references later. You talked a little bit about this piece. Can we get a little? Because I showed you that I have a book that a treasure of Chinese propaganda posters. It's pretty well known. It's released by Taschen.
I have the same one.
You have the same one. So it's like it's a heavy hitter, and they keep reprinting it, so you know it's a good one. But I definitely recognize some of that imagery, and we're gonna get a little bit more into the cultural background really soon. But in terms of the paintings, you've described the materiality of them, but the content, what is the interest? I mean, because I was excited because I grew up really liking Egypt prop, you know, so propaganda posters of all cultures are really fascinating to me, Russian ones as well. So I grew up with like very heavy doses of propaganda, and I think Javier, you had touched on that, saying, well, you come from a country which started the Jakarta method, which is like propaganda 101, and so I grew up in a country where almost every single person there believes in a constructed history instead of a true history of their country, and so and also I grew up when being Chinese was illegal, because in this kind of strive for assimilation, that the government decided, well, how do we deal with the Chinese problem in Indonesia? And the way they decided to do it was, well, we can't ship everyone out because we need the Chinese because they help us economically. We're going to make sure they get assimilated into the culture. And so we had to change our names. We couldn't have Chinese names or speak Chinese or have Chinese signs or really have any signifiers of culture. That when I finally came to the U.S., I really wanted to find out what being Chinese meant, because it was such a big label for most of my life. Well, for most of my childhood. So I started to really look into like these kind of cultural signifiers of. And that's also is very influenced by propaganda, because there's this kind of like, even when you have Asian American Heritage Month, you have this kind of
it's celebrating diversity, but a way it's like you're looking for what is an acceptable representation of your culture, right? And there had been so much in terms of, okay, well, even right now, there's a tariffs against the Chinese. Like, how does one navigate being Chinese, being Chinese American? And so this particular series comes from, is from a series called Let a Thousand Flowers Bloom, which we have some members of the audience who are probably know that a pre-Mao Cultural Revolution era movement called the 100 Flowers movement, where Mao said, let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend, meaning that in a great society, people should be able to express themselves, including artists. And as a result of that, there was a brief flowering of culture and the arts in China. So in this particular series, it's a mock invasion of the Chinese, a mock invasion of the U.S. by the Chinese, but all the actors in it are actually Asian Pacific Islander, Asian American Pacific Islander artists or academics. So.
Latino is much easier to say. So
what's that?
Latino is easier to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
AAPI.
Yeah, AAPI.
Okay.
That bringing that back to that, you did mention the Jakarta method, and I did want to talk a little bit about. So Latinos are pretty much a diasporic culture, right? Like people in Latin American cultures do not refer to themselves as Latino. Like it's an American phenomenon, and it's a way of us identifying ourselves as members of a diaspora. So it's interesting. I don't know when that term came into, but you were Sung-Hee was saying that the origins of that were like in the 70s, and we just heard about it recently. And so one of the things that I wanted to get into discussing a little bit is like our commonalities among Latinos are, we have the common language. That's like really one of the biggest assets for us, because we can basically talk to each other and understand each other in a way with inflections and sayings that don't translate, but also the ones from them is so different that, they can become funny for us, right? It's like, wait, you call that what? Like papaya is not a Cuban word. We say fruta bomba because papaya is like actually a very vulgar word for us. And so all those little nuances are what makes it, like the similarities and the differences are kind of what makes it really special to kind of like when you find someone, especially like when your Uber driver's an old Honduran woman and you're like, oh dude, I'm going to get perspective. and it's really interesting. You get a much more better sense of LA. And I feel like for Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders as well, see I struggled, this is like one of the cities where that kind of thing happens at the same level as Latinos. It's like they coexist, they cohabitate, and there's respect and stuff. But Dave, you were talking about how it wasn't always like that growing up here, right? In terms of like the situations with street culture and let's call them the lost years that you were referencing, where identity was a big deal, like. Miami, our identity was drugs, right? So that is really like what was cool. Everybody from my generation, we all looked up to Tony Montana, and he was like an Italian dude. But talk to me a little bit about that part of LA, and then also just describe the AAPI community for me as an outsider who maybe sees some similarities, but
It's actually kind of a hard question, I think, because we don't have the language.
No, I know.
So, yeah, we don't have that language as a commonality. So,
sorry, I forgot to add. The other thing is imperialism.
We have imperialism.
Yeah. Colonist cultures. Yeah,
we're all immigrants. We have that commonality. There is a sense of kinship with other Asian Americans, I think. I don't know what it is specifically that brings us together. What do you think that is, Mei?
Well, I think that I feel like most AAPI people like like the foods. Like they like to eat food from all the AAPI like cultures. Like, I mean, I don't know, we tend to like to eat similar foods, right? And I feel like we're perceived as being a community, and that maybe sometimes creates community. But I think sometimes also there's a lot of cultural similarities, because maybe not in like in Korea or in China, but there's some cultural similarities within the communities here in the way that we've like kind of like dealt with like how we've managed to like survive and flourish here.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about those unsavory times in the 90s when I like joined a gang, like trying to figure out my
I didn't
identity.
realize you had actually joined a gang. I would have just straight up. I wasn't hinting. I was actually.
We have to hear about that.
It wasn't even a Korean one; it was a Filipino one. But I think that's part of my story. Is there's that similarity. So there were like lots of Koreans joining Chinese gangs, lots of Koreans joining Filipino gangs. We all sort of have this relation. Our governments have like relationships with the U.S. And so we came en masse to this country because of those similarities, and during about the same times. So then we all kind of grew up together. We all came of age together. Our parents were mostly the immigrants, and then we were the kids that were born here or who came here when we were 1 or 2. So we essentially grew up with, and then we didn't have our parents because they were busy doing their, making a life for us. So we were left to fend for ourselves, but then on the streets, we weren't Latino, we weren't black, we weren't white. We were punked by the existing gangs. So then we kind of banded together, and then a lot of Koreans actually ended up joining Filipino gangs. Also, like just geographically, where we all settled, like the people, different Asian immigrant groups settled, like we all, like a lot of Filipinos were in Koreatown where a lot of Koreans were, so we naturally were overlapping and engaging. I don't know. That there's something there. Like I want to do a show that's about that history. That like specifically because I run the Artist Collective, the Korean American Artist Collective. I want to maybe do a show with like a Filipino Artist Collective and just talk about that shared history growing up in LA specifically.
Can I add that there's also the similarity in the way we look?
Yeah, the similarity. Yeah.
And so that creates the way people perceive us, but also the way we perceive each other, maybe.
Yeah. But there is I feel good with you. Like I feel like, like there's a little bit of a connection, like just simply because, your cultural history, your cultural background. Yeah.
You kind of understand each other because you understand.
That's understood. Yeah. That's not unsaid, unspoken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a Cuban who moved here and realized I look Persian, Middle Eastern, of very different stripes, like being perceived as something helps you feel like a kinship to them,
Yes.
I have such a soft spot when someone comes speaks Farsi to me. I'm like, oh, thank you. I don't understand it, but I like it's like someone's like, hey man, you're one of us. And how can that hurt?
Right.
Like that is never a bad feeling. And then so I wanted to get a little bit more into this Jakarta method, and I'm sorry to keep putting it through the Latino lens, but obviously today is a big day for protests that are happening right now. So we felt like it was actually pretty relevant to talk about, especially since I think you posted, Sung-Hee, that the second most deported people are Asian Americans, right? In this current climate right now. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about why I feel kinship towards AAPI, and it's kind of what we were talking about. The thing that I almost left out of the question that I asked you, but that sense of imperialism, right? The only Asian country that I've been to is the Philippines, and one of the things that I was shocked was just how much reverence to the American military there is in branding of stuff. And then the other thing that was kind of crazy is that all the people on the billboards don't look like the people in the community, which was like, I was like, oh, imperialism. That's like really, really intense, influence there. And so you mentioned the Jakarta method. And for people that don't know, the Jakarta method was basically anytime you see regime change in Latin American countries, all of that destabilizing, all of that anti-communism comes from the first efforts to destabilize. And it was an anti-communist movement, the genocide, right?
Right. I think the Jakarta method has as its basis the anti-communism because it was during the Cold War.
Yeah. And if anyone has seen the Act of Killing, that was like when I was like, oh, this is like heavy, And so to me, that's interesting. Is it okay to ask you about how you feel about the politics of the community? Are they as varied as they are in the Latino community, or is everybody just the left wing?
You mean in the AAPI?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's quite varied, actually.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? How that happens. And then I have here that we wanted to talk about sort of how you were kind of alluding to it in your intro, Sung-Hee, the idea that there weren't really many opportunities. And as people that, as someone who has taken initiative with the Korean arts, what was it?
Korean American Artists Collective.
Korean American Artists Collective.
Yeah, a lot.
No, it's fine. It's very clear what it is. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what the mission is with that? Because when we were talking, I noticed that since 2020, which is when the George Floyd protests, the BLM and all of that started, that's really when you started to see Latino artists like Mexicans, which is crazy to me because this is like Mexico, right? We just moved the border. So the idea that they suddenly start to get into spaces, but we haven't necessarily seen that kind of push in the to platform AAPI artists and get them shows at the same rate. I would say you're probably at the forefront of that, no? And in trying to bring togetherness and with all the challenges that may come.
Yeah, I think so. I think I agree with you because it's because of how we formed and why we formed and what I experienced growing up in the art world as a Korean American artist. Not having seen that kind of community or not having found any that I could, be a part of. But, we started accidentally a little bit. We started by doing auctions. So we wanted to do like Korean Americans for Black Lives Matter, for example. So that's actually how we started. We gathered a bunch of Korean American artists and donated a bunch of artwork and then raised like $15,000 for like BLM related organizations. And then we did several other auctions similar to that for like voting rights and different big issues when Trump came to power the first time. So then we naturally realized we had a network, or not a network, but a community of Korean Americans, and decided to organize like officially at that point. And that's actually how we started. Yeah, and I think primarily if you ask people why they joined or why they wanted to form this, it's for community. And I think it goes back to your initial question about like similarities and kinship and like feeling connected to like other Asians, for example. I think naturally feel that with the specific culture you're part of. But then I will always say part of our mission is to expand the larger AAPI movement of in the arts world, right? So for me, it's not explicitly a part of our mission, but what you mentioned about Latinos and Black artists having big shows and being recognized by like big institutions and big blue chip galleries and this whole movement that started, like part of that's mission for me. Part of that's the mission for Korean American artists and AAPI artists. So we're essentially a platform, a community. We as a organization, you can raise funds easier than an individual artist. So we collectively raise funds, write grants, and then like we can distribute it amongst our members or put on shows or help fund something like this that's, that we believe in. So
would you teach a Latino how to write grants?
I'm personally bad at it, and it's, there's very few people who are interested in doing that. But
exclusionary.
I'm happy to make some intros.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, no, I mean I do feel like also as we acknowledge this, LA's art scene has also not been it's as big as other art scenes because like. It's been around, like I know people have been coming to Bergamot for like 20 years and stuff, but it really wasn't until like we got Hauser and Wirth in 2016 recently. So all those big institutions weren't even out here until like, recently. So it's interesting how those opportunities are coming and then banding together, I think is like one of the best ways you can do that, right? Like support systems in the art community are really like where it's at. I would say it really is a powerful tool for like organizing stuff, and then you want to say anything else about gang life?
Gang life? No, I don't know. I've said everything that pertains to what we're talking about. I guess if you're interested in other things.
Yeah. Well, no, I guess the thing that is interesting to me about that is like LA is a really resilient city, and we were talking about like to me that helped me piece together the idea of the gang culture because that didn't happen in Miami, and it definitely wasn't going on. I mean, it happens in Rome, but like in the mafia, like that's like heavy organized crime. But the idea that like MS-13 really became what it is in the U.S. It wasn't, and it was in a similar situation to where you were at, where you were getting punked on, and all of that. So it's interesting how aggressive that is. And my understanding is that all comes from like a lot of PTSD from the Vietnam War, right? A lot of people were coming and they were young, they knew guerrilla tactics, they knew war tactics, and it just goes back to that imperialism element, which I think is really interesting.
The commonality, yeah.
Yeah, so even though you were within the borders of the U.S., you still had to deal with a lot of the fallout for...
Yeah, especially like you're mentioning that's like the Vietnamese and like the Southeast Asians. Their wars and genocides are a lot more recent, right?
Yeah.
So for us, it was like the 50s or 60s, but so they're directly coming from that.
Yeah.
Like it was in the 80s, right? So like, yeah. So it's like top of mind when they
and as a Cuban with communism looming over, it's a pretty interesting. I mean, I'm not anti-communist, but it is an interesting thing that like there's just two sides of the Cold War, and you're either in the empire or you're not because they won, right? Mm-hmm. Which is interesting. Can I ask you a little bit more about the experience of coming to the U.S.? You came here with how many different identities that you had to for societal collapse is the word you in your bio?
Well, it's interesting because the history of the Chinese in Indonesia has been kind of, I mean, we also had a lot of issues during the Dutch occupation, and so it was always the Dutch tended to racially divide. That's how they kept people from overthrowing their government. So
they have a brutal reputation.
Yeah. And so that was, I think, part of the problem with Chinese in Indonesia was also left over from the Dutch. And it's very similar actually to the status of the Jews in pre-World War II Germany.
Yeah.
Almost identical. And so I think you said the Peranakan Chinese tended to have all these names in order to, because we didn't really know what our futures would be. So there tended to, my Chinese name is a name that was given to me by my grandfather, and it's linked to our family poem, and where our middle name is a is a word from the poem, so that if we find somebody else in the world from our family, we would know where they are within, if we call them aunt, or if they're grandmother, or where they are in the lineage. But then there's the Indonesian names, because it was compulsory. It was to change your name, so everyone changed their names.
Wow, that's intense.
So there was the Indonesian name, and then of course there was the Western name, because that was the dream. And my sister was named after a cruise ship.
Which one?
It was the SS Belinda. And I was named after a Disney film, Cinderella. So that was my name is Cinderella.
Okay. Is that why it was Cindy in the Zoom call?
Yeah.
I've never seen Cinderella shortened to Cindy.
Yeah.
That's great.
But you do see a lot of fanciful Asian names that Asians have, right? When they're not really familiar with the West, and they give themselves really interesting names.
Yeah.
So, so that's the reason for the names. My mother also had those various names too. And I don't know if people know what the Jakarta method is. I don't know if
it's basically just step on someone's neck until they it's regime change. Go ahead.
Like you replace the whoever is democratically elected, and you put in a dictator, and then you get paramilitary organizations. You have a military coup, and then you change the story. So everybody who is against you becomes is reimagined as being like these horribly wicked people, and then everyone who is in support of the coup becomes the histories of the heroes of the country. And I do think that a lot of people from Latin countries really respond to my work, and I think that maybe part of it has to do with that, because of these kind of shared history that that the presence of the military and this kind of
there would be no Nicaragua or El Salvador civil wars or all of those, like it's just constant.
North and South Korea.
North and South Korea. It's just right. All
Brazil,
comes from. How does it feel to be from the
Chile,
home of that?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's wild, man. No, that really is interesting, and there's just so many questions that I'm fascinated by, but feel like they might be a little too prying about your experience. So I'll just leave it at that. We did mention that we wanted to talk, and I think that this is a really interesting point, because as we were talking about it, the damage that the model minority myth does to Asian communities, right? Because while we were talking, we acknowledged, like, yes, there is definitely not the same level of incarceration for Asian communities as there is for Black and Brown. So we want to acknowledge that. We're not erasing that, but I think it is important to talk about, like, we're still talking about an immigrant community, and the lives were not easy moving in. And I have a bunch of notes here that I don't remember because you guys know what we were talking about. But
yeah,
I have second wave of Koreans.
Oh, the second wave of Koreans, but model minority.
Yeah. Or just not necessarily within the frame of model minority, but I think that what does that erase? Because model minority myth, for people that don't know, is that Asians are highly educated. They're more like, they're doctors and stuff like that. And Latinos, I mean, you've heard Trump talk, so you know what ours are. But I do think that, like, it does you guys a huge disservice, because the more it erases class within the communities, right? Does that seem fair, of a fair assessment?
I think it erases the complexity of a culture and a people, and maybe it silences their, the kind of trauma that they've had, and this, I think it makes them silent. Right?
Yeah, I think Asians statistically in the U.S., I think, are in the top whatever percent, but also in the lowest, at the extreme opposite as well. So if you talk about the minority myth, you're completely ignoring everybody in the middle and people at the bottom, the very bottom. So
And it also only acknowledges what's happening within the borders and not where these communities are coming from, right? Not everybody's coming from a first world country that's coming to California,
Right.
Which is an interesting thing to really think about. I had a thought, and then I just lost it.
It's oppressive too. It's structurally, it's oppressive.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's definitely, it's one of those things that like, it's like stereotypes. Who doesn't want a positive stereotype? But like
Right.
it doesn't. Stereotypes don't help in either case, which I think is interesting. I mean, I definitely have learned so much just living in Los Angeles, right? Like Miami it's mostly Cuban. And a lot of Latin American people from all over the world. So we speak like Spanish everywhere. Like there's people that at jobs, like you go to the grocery store and they'll be, and you'll talk to somebody in English and they'll be like, habla con él, which surprised me about LA too, because one of the things that's what made me realize that LA is it is still Mexico. Is that like you have so many generations. Miami Cubans were diaspora generation. So everybody I grew up with was either first or second generation. They spoke Spanish. They spoke English like they spoke Spanish. I used to have the accent too. But like over here, you have people that have been living here for generations. They don't speak Spanish anymore because the border just moved, right? So it's a really interesting experience coming out here. I think LA is a beautiful place. And I'm really proud to be from here, as with everybody standing up right now lately, which is cool. But okay, let's talk about the art practices.
Wait, may I say
yeah,
something
for
about
sure.
the model minority myth? I think what it does is
I was moving on because I felt like maybe we were uncomfortable.
No, I just meant that I don't think it acknowledges the struggle that a lot of Asian Americans had, like our parents had, that we had. I mean, that it wasn't quite as easy as it espouses to be. And those stories are important stories.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that AAPI has brought to light to me as an outsider.
Yeah.
Which AAPI, sorry, dyslexic. But yeah, no, I think that's super fascinating. So then, but I do want to get a little bit into the talking about art practices.
I'm sorry, I don't have the notes, but do we have a lot more?
Oh no, I mean,
over time.
Huh?
And I'd love to have some questions.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Well, first, this is really important and really touches me, of course. But is there anything that we talked about pre-talk? Anything that you guys want to touch upon before we
go to questions?
Yeah, I think we covered
We covered a lot.
Echo Mei's thoughts about model minority, because So I mean, obviously, the topic of culture and racism and immigration is like super hot. Like we're living in it now, and that was part of the reason why this talk was so important to have. And again, there is a tendency for, stereotypes do exist for a reason, but they're stereotypes, they're generalizations. To make generalizations about AAPI covers over 50 countries in the world. And just in this room alone, like there's huge diversities within each culture. Even the countries that are right next to each other, just like in Europe, there may be neighbors, but they're completely different cultures. So anytime you apply a stereotype generalization, even if it is perceived as a compliment, like model minority, it pigeonholes who people are, and it takes away their individual identity. So that term has become a real thorn, specifically for me. I hate hearing that. Like, yeah, sure, yeah, we do everything perfectly. And one other note, I'm like the pooper of the talk. Just one other thing I did want to mention, though, was something I heard recently about like apparently there's some a book or some studies out or commentary also talking about, oh well, Asians don't have it as badly because we're light complected and we're closer to white. We're the closest to white of like the major races, so therefore we don't experience as much discrimination or struggles. Which once again, again, it's the same thing. Like, wow, I have to find out who said this, right? And go right to them or something. But it's I don't know, that kind of thing is appalling to me. So just want to get those couple of comments out, and just back to the show. You're looking at the artwork all in front of you. Mei's works are the photographic works, the one behind Javier, and then the goddess picture on the other side of this partition. Dave's works are the video drama piece right by the front door. This painting called Root, and this small painting that's become our kind of icon for the show. And then another piece that's in front of the window called Grace's Beauty Salon. So invite you definitely to look at all of the work. We have the other artists here with us. Brian Ida is sitting over in the corner here. He created this beautiful circular geometric piece, and the two pieces to my right over here. Tia is standing by the back door. She's a recent Otis graduate from the MFA program. Congratulations, Tia. Her pieces are the green large collage painting here, the two drawings in the red frame, and the smaller painting to the right of it. Miki Yokoyama, also by the back door, is one of our artists. She's done the beautiful, colorful paintings. One right behind me, she created during the opening reception. And then there's another piece here and a third here. So I wanted to introduce you to the other artists. Did I miss anybody? I think I got everyone that's here from the show. Sorry, I didn't. I'm like, cut it, and then I come up and like, keep it rambling. But I think those are important things that I wanted to mention. And then, shall we go to? Do people have any questions or comments?
Anyone have questions? You don't have to. Nothing. We were so efficient.
Everything.
Nailed everything. Well, then thank you guys for coming out. We ended up with a huge crowd.
I know.
It's very nice.
Yay.
Thank you. All right. Yeah.